Good morning, everyone. My name is Maya Luria with TMC for Seniors, and today we're going to be talking about phishing and aging with Matthew Grilli. He is a PhD with the University of Arizona's Department of Psychology. Matt, you've been doing quite a bit of research, I know, on this topic and just how computer scams in general can sort of affect seniors, of course, and just like it is everyone. And I think now it's such an important time as there's a lot more computer and phone use going on than what we've seen in the past. So welcome, Matt.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So I'm going to go ahead. You may be watching us today on either our YouTube channel or on our Facebook pages. And if you have any questions, please feel free to leave those in the comments, and Matt will be able to answer those afterwards. So I'm going to hand the floor over to you, Matt, to get started.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone. And thanks for taking time out of your day to be here. I've prepared about a 30 to 40 minute talk about scamming, phishing, which is a term I'll define today, and how folks are being targeted today with scams through online and other digital means. And I'll be focusing in particular on the sorts of scams that are being targeted towards older adults. The title of my talk is Are You For Real? Identifying and Avoiding Scammers Who Are Targeting Older Adults in 2022 now. So I wanted to start with a bit of background about who I am and where I come from. So I'm an associate professor at the University of Arizona in the psychology department. I direct a laboratory that we call the Human Memory Lab. In a lot of ways, identifying and avoiding scams has to do with making memories and calling on those memories at the right time and in the right place. I also direct our neuropsychology training program. This is a PhD program that's designed to train the next generation of clinical neuropsychologists who are trying to understand how the brain supports different ways of thinking, from learning and memory to attention and language and beyond. And clinical neuropsychologists who are not just trying to advance our understanding of how the brain works, but are also trying to improve how we assess brain functioning through our cognition, through the way we speak, through the way we remember and attend to things. And so clinical neuropsychologists work at places like TMC, as well as other hospitals and private clinics, and at the university. And we try to improve well-being and healthy living for many different groups of people, including older adults. So that's a little bit of background about who I am and what I do at the university, the sort of research that we're interested in, and the clinical training that we're teaching to our graduate students and our undergraduates as well. For today, what I'd like to do is take some time, like I said, to talk about scamming, phishing emails, and the sorts of attacks, really, that are being directed towards older adults today. And I've broken my talk down into three basic goals. The first is for you to walk away from today feeling like you've learned, if you didn't already suspect or know, that unfortunately older adults are targeted by scams, more so than any other group, in fact. And these scams are increasingly online, which many older adults feel less comfortable navigating. And these scams are increasingly difficult to detect. So I hate to use the word clever to describe scammers, but in many ways, they do a good job of getting into our minds and thinking through how they think we'll react to different sorts of messages, and essentially trying to trick us. So that's one of my goals for today. Another is is for you to walk away feeling like you have a better idea of what scams look like. So it's easy for me to say, well, they're out there and they're trying to trick you into giving them information. But ideally, you'd have a better idea of how to detect them, and also how to avoid falling for them. And so these will be some of the second objective that I have for today. The third is to know how to get help for yourself if you find yourself in a situation where, unfortunately, you've been a victim of a scam or you know somebody who you think might have been a victim of a scam. There are places that you can go to get help, and to try to undo that problem. And we'll talk a little bit today about what some of those resources are. Okay, so that's a lot. Where do we start? Well, this is a question, and I've actually broken down this where do we start question into several more questions that I'll try to answer over the next 20 to 30 minutes or so. We'll walk through each one of these in turn, and we're going to start with just talking broadly about what a scam is. And then we'll turn to why we should be motivated to care about them, and the way that they're trying to the way that they're sort of working into our lives today, what they look like. I imagine that many of you are wondering whether older adults have a harder time detecting scams. That's a complex question, it turns out. I'll share some data from our research group, in fact, at the university, that says the answer is both no and yes. So, in some ways, older adults don't have a harder time detecting scams, but in other ways, there are sort of particular vulnerabilities that older adults have to be careful about. And then finally, well, okay, now that I know that, how do I protect myself? So we'll go through each of these, and we're going to start again with this first one of, well, so what is a scam exactly? Since that's going to be what the focus of today's talk is. Well, we can start with sort of your classic dictionary definition of a scam, and here I've pulled one as such definition, and according to the Merriam-Webster Online Dictionary, a scam is a fraudulent or deceptive act or operation. And the example that the Merriam-Webster dictionary gives is an insurance scam. So I think that this is a fine, knowledge-based or technical definition of a scam. But I think there's a few things about a scam that it overlooks and are important to put some more thought and consideration toward. One is that the example they give is actually viewing scams more as from the perspective of the scammer as opposed to the person who's been scammed. And from my perspective, um, as much as I'd like to stop scammers, I'm more concerned about the people who are being scammed and how do we protect them. The second is that it's a very non emotional definition of a scam. When we unfortunately know that being the victim of a scam is typically quite emotional, and in many ways can feel an attack on our trust. So anyone who has been a victim of a scam knows what I mean. You feel like you can't understand how somebody would take advantage of you in that way in many cases. It can also be a source of embarrassment. And this is, particularly an issue because we know that many people, when they are scammed, uh, have such mixed feelings about being a victim of a scam that they are hesitant and sometimes don't tell anybody that it happened, and they or they wait a long time to finally acknowledge that it happened and to try to get help in sort of undoing the problem that they've found themselves in. Okay? And these sorts of aspects of a scam are missed in that sort of dictionary definition, but they capture the important human side of it. When we think about scams that are directed towards older adults, I think it's also important to note that according to the National Institutes on Health, these are the institutes that direct a lot of the research that we do at the University of Arizona. The National Institutes on Health funds the research that I do in my lab. For them, we should be thinking about scams directed towards older adults as a form of elder abuse. And in many ways, when you think about the human side of a scam, you can appreciate why the National Institutes on Health view this as one way in which older adults are unfortunately being the targets of abuse today. And when we think about scamming in this way, we realize that, like other forms of elder abuse, scams can affect our relationships. They can impact our mental health. One of the sadly most common outcomes of being scammed is increased depression, increased loneliness, and it can impact our physical health. So there is, in fact, an increased risk for decline in physical health and change from independent to assisted living in older adults who have been scammed. And there's likely lots of reasons why that happens, but it's a fact that we should be aware of, and all the more reason or motivation to stop this sort of thing from happening. That gives us a sense of what a scam is. It's a fraudulent or deceptive act, sure, but it also has a very personal side. And when targeted towards older adults, we can view it as a form of elder abuse. Well, that probably already starts to answer the next question of, well, why should we care about scams? Well, it seems sort of obvious from that standpoint of what a scam truly is. But there's other reasons to care about scams and to try to stop them, especially when we're thinking about older age. We have enough evidence now to confidently say that, unfortunately, we know scammers target older adults. They're likely doing this for a variety of reasons, some being stereotyped, ageist based. And as I'll talk about today, some of those stereotypes we know aren't true, but it doesn't prevent the fact that they're still targeting older adults because they believe these stereotypes. And others are more matter of fact, of reasons why they're targeting older adults. And that's partly because scammers know that older adults have more money. One thing to know is that the research on who is most vulnerable to scams, I'm kind of giving away part of the story that comes up later. But the group that's actually most vulnerable to scams are teenagers and young adults. They're becoming more independent, but they're not very good at being independent yet. They are in some ways more trusted of others online, and so they are actually more vulnerable to being scammed. But scammers don't view them as their primary target because they also know teenagers and young adults don't have a lot of money in general. So they're not an optimal target for these scammers. Older adults, however, tend to have more money. Uh, uh, Again, some of the things that sorts of stereotyped based judgments. So scammers assume that older adults are more trusting and less knowledgeable of scam tactics, even though, as I'll point out, this isn't necessarily true, but this is their stereotype. This is what they assume. Some other things is that they unfortunately know, however, that some older adults are in fact going to be more vulnerable to scams. And this is because in older age, certain risk factors do increase in prevalence. Unfortunately, loneliness is higher in older adults, and some even mild cognitive difficulties are more common in older adults than in middle-aged or younger adults, all other things ignored if we just focus on age. So scammers attempt to exploit these risks and vulnerabilities. We also know that scammers have found a variety of ways to invade our social worlds. Um, if we think about that sort of dictionary definition of scams again, an insurance scam, well, we're probably thinking about a scam that unfolds over the phone or through traditional postage and mail. And scammers still use those sort of vehicles for scamming you today. They'll send you things through the mail, in your mailbox. They'll call you on the phone. But they've expanded the sorts of attacks that they use and the different hooks that they try to that they drop in the pond and hope to catch you on. So unfortunately, really any way in which you can receive information, any website that you go to online, any email type of email that you get is an entry point for scammers to try to get to you. And scams, unfortunately, I put it in quotes because I'm not sure it's the best way to think about it, but scams do work. Um, these numbers are startling. I suspect we'll get 2021 numbers soon, but these were the most recent data that I could pull. The Federal Trade Commission, which tracks these sorts of things, received 2.1 million fraudulent reports in 2020. That's a lot of reports of fraud, especially if we consider that, like I said earlier, there are lots of reports that don't, or there's lots of incidents of fraud that don't get reported because of embarrassment and these sorts of things. And those 2.1 million fraudulent reports were estimated to cost the victims of scams a total of $3.3 billion. This is all in the US. So these are some startling numbers about the impact that scams have on us and had on us in 2020. And there's no reason to think it's gotten better, I would say. If anything, it's gotten worse. And I guess we'll know more, I think, soon when 2021 numbers come out. Okay, so I hope I'm not being too alarming in making the case why we should care about scams. Um, but now that we're probably on the same page about the importance of them, let's talk a little bit about what they look like, and then we'll talk about what you can do about it. Well, what do they look like? I've put four examples on the screen here. These are ones that I've just pulled over the past couple of years. When I see them come across my news, my Google News, or my news on Twitter, of scams that are increasing in popularity or targeting Arizonans. We even see here an article from the Daily Star that is in the middle. Tucson area senior citizens are targeted by romance scammers. And so if we take a closer look at headlines, we realize that scammers, well, what do scams look like? Well, they come after a lot of different psychological feelings. They come after our interest in winning, and money and pleasure. So they go after lotteries and sweepstakes. They go after our interest in forming close relationships and love. And they go after our fears and our interest in protecting ourselves. So some of the more recent ones, as the bottom example and the one to the right show, are targeting the pandemic. So the Arizona Attorney General warns older adults that coronavirus scams have started. And those have taken a number of different sort of directions. One, It's much smaller, but this is a news article to the right here that says scammers are starting to sell fake and unauthorized COVID-19 kits. And they're in the process getting your personal information and medical information. So these are, unfortunate tactics, but these are what scams can look like. These are just four examples. We can take a more technical, sort of content-based approach to asking what scams look like and how they try to hook us. Um, and that's what we'll do now. So what they look like can be one way to answer that question is to ask how they kind of get to you. So what will they physically look like to your eyes and to your other senses? And here, I think it's important to know that they can be on your phone. You could be interacting with a scam when you pull up your phone and see a phone call or an email or a text. That's not the only places they come in, though. They come on your home computer. They come on your tab or iPads and your other tablet type devices. So they're all over the internet. And you could interact with a scam in lots of different mediums or internet based and digital based or cellular based devices. So what they look like can be very different from one sort of internet or cellular based device to the next. And you can see that here. It could be a click on an inbox, you've got a message. It could be a text coming from a number that you may or may not recognize. And it could be a phone call using a local area code in many cases, making you whether it might be somebody who you know or could benefit from your help or needs to get a hold of you for some reason. Now, when it comes to thinking about things coming in more internet form, this is where this term phishing comes up, which you might or might not have heard about. Phishing is a type of scam that is digitally based. It's this scamming device where they use different ways of getting to you through the internet or through cellular to trick you into clicking on a link, to responding to a message, and in one or the other case, ultimately providing personal information, whether you realize that's what you're doing or not, or downloading what's called malware, which is malicious software, to your phone or your computer, tablet, that will, without you knowing, start looking into your personal information because it's all over those devices and it's hard to stop it from being discoverable once this software is downloaded to your device. And scammers are using all sorts of what we call weapons to hook you or to phish you. And this is partly where that term comes from. When they're working to get to you through your email and your text and your phone calls and so on. So when we talk about what scams look like, you could be thinking about what types of tactics they're using to message to you. And here are 6 of the most common types of message or weapons that they use to try to get to you. They could use authority, give you that sense that, well, they're in charge and you better do what you've been asked. They can threaten you with punishment, which is something that many people in that moment will feel like they would like to avoid. So you can avoid this fee if you, and then it goes on to tell you something, well, you don't want to be punished, so you're maybe more inclined to do what they ask. Reward. So sometimes it's what a pleasant message to receive. I won something. All I have to do is go to this link to claim it. Unfortunately, they can go after our social relationships. They could use this as a weapon. So they can claim that your friend sent you a message. It's not really from them, but they're essentially masquerading as your friend, and they're going to try and get personal information from you that way. They could use urgency, and I think this is one of the things you've got to be really careful about. It's a very powerful weapon that they use. In general, I think texts and phone and email give that sense that you need to do something now. In fact, over the years, I've learned that when it's a hard email to send, it shouldn't be an email I send today. And this applies to all of us when we think we see something that might be suspicious. Do I need to really respond right now? They'll want to give you the sense that you do. And they'll also try to appeal to the idea of limited resources. So this is a once lifetime opportunity, or only the first 10 people who respond are going to get this. And that kind of builds on this sense of urgency. Like, I better take the chance while I have it. These, again, are some of the most common weapons that scammers use in general, but especially when they're phishing through your email, through your text messages, and phone calls. And they'll go after all sorts of subs in your life, or areas of your life. So they'll go after your banking and other finances. They'll sort of use these weapons from the context of family and friends. Like I mentioned, your friend has sent you a message, click here to read the message. They find out what your leisure activities are, or they make an educated guess about the sorts of things that you'd like to do, and they come after you that way. They go after the sorts of websites that you visit. So these sorts of things are being tracked by most internet providers and search engines. And if that information is compromised, they know what sorts of things you like to go to online, and they'll try to get you that way. Sometimes they threaten your reputation, unfortunately. And I think this one's covered up a little bit, but they go after your philanthropy, which is equally disgusting. So your goodwill can be used against you. So those are the different weapons that scammers will use, and the sort of content that they go after. I suppose if you take a step back, you probably realize that nothing is off limits to these people, unfortunately. They'll try to reach you in any way that they possibly can. And they'll use any means to draw your attention and interest and make you feel like it's the right thing to do to click on a link or to respond to a message. And ultimately, unfortunately, give them the information they need or download what they want you to so that they can get that private information from you. And so this then brings us to, again, that question that many of you might be wondering is it really harder to detect scams in older age? And I've already alluded to this a little bit. And so the answer is complicated. And it's one of the reasons why we're studying it and researching it at the university. This is research that I do in collaboration with my colleague, Dr. Robert or Bob Wilson, who has a decision-making laboratory at the University of Arizona in the psychology department and the cognitive sciences department. And so oftentimes we like to collaborate different laboratories in the psychology department. And this is a point where Dr. Wilson and I realized there was a good opportunity to collaborate here and build on his expertise with decision making and my expertise with aging and memory, and see if we could get a better grasp on in what ways scams could be more difficult to detect, if any, in older age, and what we might be able to do about it. So I do want to share some data, some results from a study that we did in 2018 and then published in 2020. Sometimes it takes that long, but the pandemic did also have an impact on our progress there. But it's just going to be a glimpse into the sort of work that we're doing here. And that's partly because this is actually, surprisingly, given everything that I just shared, an understudied topic. And so there's lots of questions that we just don't know the answer to when it comes to scam detection in older age. And in my opinion, this is unfortunate, and we need to keep doing the research that we're doing, because I'm quite confident that the scammers know what ways they should be trying to target older adults and so on and so forth. And so we need to kind of catch up and play better defense. So part of our motivation here is that we're not convinced, at least Dr. Wilson and I and our labs are not convinced that older adults are necessarily that older adults necessarily have a harder time picking up on scams. We think it's quite possible that we just think about scamming as being a bigger problem for older adults simply because older adults are targeted more. Like I said, we know that scammers go after older adults because they at least think, maybe because of stereotypes, that older adults are more vulnerable, and they do know that older adults tend to have more money, so they're a better target for them. And like I mentioned earlier, there's actually some evidence that teenagers are actually the most likely to fall scams. And this might not be a surprise to many people on this call. But teenagers don't always make the most sound decisions. They don't necessarily think everything all the way through. And they've grown up with the internet. And so for them, it's not necessarily something to be cautious about and to worry about who's asking for the information and where they're from and where they live and all those sorts of things. Now, and I think this is potentially also a problem for older adults, though, but for a different reason. That is sort of the fact that scammers are now going through the internet. Because in a lot of ways, we could think that older adults have more experience and knowledge to draw on. Older adults, they've lived longer, they've made more mistakes to learn from. And so older adults might, in general, be quite good at detecting that something is a little off and protecting themselves from a scammer. But one area where older adults may not be able to benefit so much from their experience and knowledge is when things are online. And that's because this is not the way in which we've used phones and sent messages has changed dramatically in the lifespan of older adults today. And so it's an area where there's less experience and knowledge to draw on. And the example I show here is sort of one of the original car phones and the way, we shouldn't be using phones while we're in the car, but the way people often use their phones while they're in their car today. The image to the left is, I'm pretty sure, an image of the exact phone that my grandfather had in his Ford Bronco. And I remember we were all really excited when he got that and thought it was the greatest technological advance imaginable. He was involved in real estate and he'd stop and take calls on this phone. And if he were alive today, I'm sure he would feel excited by the advances in cell phone technology. But in many ways, I think I'd also wonder if he, sort of could draw on his knowledge and experience to its full capacity, or if he might be more vulnerable to the way scammers try to get to you today through your phones. And so this was really sort of the questions and the thinking that's motivated our line of work at the university. And so we really focused on scams getting to older adults through email, something that is quite new and different from the way, all things considered, it's not that new anymore, but certainly different from the way messages used to be received. This is probably it is the most common way in which phishing emails get to older adults. And it's rapidly growing as a means that scammers are using to try and get personal information. As a starting point, we wanted to get a better sense of whether in older age, it is in fact more difficult to read an email and to confidently say that it's a scam or it's legitimate. It's likely a real message from somebody I know, and it's making a reasonable request. And so to get at this question, we ran a study in the lab pre-pandemic where middle-aged and older adults on a computer were asked to go through a fake, we made up an inbox, an email inbox. And we asked the middle-aged and older adults to go through and to judge a bunch of emails on a scale from this is definitely a safe email that I could and I probably would uh, if this were real life and my inbox. Definitely suspicious and something I would avoid at all costs. I'll just delete it right away. And what we did is we actually took a bunch of emails from our own university inboxes that were real, legitimate emails. So we knew that they were safe. And we also took a bunch of emails that the university had flagged as scams. So our university and many others keep track of these things to help us sort of, protect ourselves against them. And so we took these emails. They were no longer active or capable of affecting anybody, but we used the idea behind them to see if this was something that many middle-aged and older adults were able to pick up on as probably a fraud or probably a scam. So since we knew that some of these emails were safe and some of them weren't, we could get a better sense of whether in older age it's becoming more difficult to detect these sorts of things through email. So I'm going to show you some data from this study now. This is a project that we ran in about 90 middle-aged to older adults. And in this figure to the right here, each dot is one of those participants. Now, along the bottom, you can see age and years. So we're tracking, in this case, how old each of those participants was when they took part in this study. And along the line going, the graph where it's going up and down, in this case, we're keeping track of whether people had a bias. So you could imagine that some people could look at emails and say, I think they're all scams. I don't trust any email. I'm just going to call everything a scam. That'd be a strong bias to think that emails are not safe. On the other end of the spectrum, some people might say, oh, they're all probably safe. I don't really need to worry about these things. And that'd be a bias to say that everything is safe. What we see here is that there's a big range. Dots are all over the place when it comes to going up and down on the graph. So some people think things tend to be safe. Some people think emails tend to be scams. But this line is pretty flat as we look at how things change with older age. So what this tells us is that older adults are not more or less likely to be trustworthy of emails. So we don't see a change in bias. With older age, you don't become less trustworthy of emails, and with older age, you don't more trustworthy. And the fact that people aren't becoming more trustworthy, I'd say, is a good thing. But in some ways, it doesn't translate necessarily to the outcomes that we're hoping for. So here, again, each dot is one participant in our study, and we've got age graphed along the bottom. But now, along the side of the graph going up and down, we're graphing how accurate people are. And the higher up you are on the graph, the more accurate you tend to be, meaning you're really good at picking up on a safe email and saying that's safe, and you're really good at picking up on a scam and saying it's a scam. And so what we see here is that as we get older, there is a drop in accuracy. So unfortunately, with older age, for reasons we're still trying to clarify, we don't have all the answers here. Some safe emails are called scams. So you might be missing some important messages because you thought that they were a scam. And some scams, unfortunately, are thought to be safe. And that's a problem as big or bigger than thinking safe emails are scams, because it means you might click on them and give away that information that the scammer is looking for. So again, this is an ongoing area of research that Dr. Wilson and I are running. COVID pandemic considerations in mind, we're hoping to continue with more in-person research on this in the spring. So if you find it interesting and want involved, I think these slides will be made available afterwards. I hope so, because I'm going to give some more links soon. And here's one link. This is a safe email link. You could reach out to us, and we'll let you know when we get started with this research again. Okay, so I did just share that with older age, in some ways, at least detecting email scams is getting harder. Some scams are thought to be safe, and some safe emails are thought to be scams, and both can be a problem if it's a bill from the utility company and you think it's a scam and you don't answer it. But to be fair, the bigger issue would be clicking on a scam and giving away information that could be used against you. So how do you protect yourself? I've come up with 4 rules to follow, and we'll walk through each one of these in turn with the time that I have left. And my undergraduates at the university probably could have warned you that naturally, I'm speaking more than I initially thought that I would have, but I should still be wrapped up in about 10 minutes. So let's go through each of these rules and for following them. So one is to make sure that you're staying safe with your online shopping. Well, what is that? That's probably, I knew that. Well, what are some things that you can do to make sure that you're staying safe with your online shopping? One is to never click links in your email or on social media that are reportedly going to take you to some online store. It's not that you can't go to those websites or support small business in the sense that it's a new place here in Tucson and you want to go and you're just going to click their link. Don't do it that way though. Instead, type the name into your search engine, whether you use Google or something else, and go to their website directly. Even many small businesses, if they're advertising online, they're going to have their own website, and go find it using the search engine instead of clicking on the link. And in many cases, if it's a shop that you go to a lot, all search engines have a bookmarks tab, which is basically just a way to save your place. So if you look for your bookmarks and you start making bookmarks for websites that you go to often, you don't even have to type their name into the search engine. You can just click on the link in your bookmarks that will take you to that website. And so the short of it is, just don't click on links in emails or on Facebook that say, come here for this sale. Go to the website directly. And when it comes to online shopping, come up with different passwords. I know it's hard to come up with too many passwords. We just end up forgetting them. But if you end up just sort of sticking to a few passwords, which I know many of us do, don't use the same password for online shopping that you do for other important websites like your bank and utilities. Keep separate passwords for those places so that if your password is compromised, it can't then be used to go access your bank accounts and your utilities where they can get bank account information and that sort of thing. So these are some simple tips to follow for safe online shopping. Another sort of rule to follow is to make sure that you're doing what you can to spot phishing emails. So I just pointed out that this can get harder in older age. Well, what can you do to stop yourself from falling victim to a scam email? Well, one is to look carefully at the email address, not just the handle, logo, or name that comes along with the email. And that's because oftentimes they will know what name to say the email is coming from. But if you look carefully at the email address, it's not that person's or that company's actual email address. So you can figure out right away in many cases that it's a scam because they're using just some random Gmail account, for example, but they knew to say it was coming from Dr. Mac Riley, come participate in this research study. And then the email account is actually, some numbers and letters at gmail.com. That's not me. Never, when you're dealing with email, never feel pressured to do something immediately. Very rarely are you going to get a message that requires immediate action. And so don't feel like you need to make that a decision right away. Same goes with not getting too excited about something immediately. Another is don't give personal information in email. Why did they need it in email, of all places? If it's a message coming from someone you got an email from someone you know asking for something, and it might be personal information, call them. You know them. Give them a ring and ask them why they need it and give it to them over the phone if it makes sense. Be careful with attachments and links. And that's not a real link, but that's what links often look like, this sort of light colored blue with a line underneath it. They don't necessarily go where they say they're going when they say click here to go to our website. They could be going to someplace where you download malicious software and you don't even know it. Attachments, same issue. When someone says, oh, open the attached document, do you need to open that attached document? If you're suspicious or concerned, call them and ask them why they sent you an attachment. That attachment could be malicious software. Another is to protect yourself on the phone. So keep in mind that they're still calling, scammer is. They still call. You can put your number on the National Do Not Call Registry, and that phone number is here, and these slides I'm pretty sure will be made available later. So you can write down that number, you can call, and get your number put on the Do Not Call Registry. It's good to remind the registry every year or so because sometimes things change, but this could just be something you do right around January 1. Just put your number on the list again. Another is to never send money over the phone without first discussing with other people that you trust. Does this sound like a reasonable request? Related to this is making sure you're talking to who you think you are. So you might have heard of this, but it's called the grandma or grandpa scam, where somebody calls and they say, is this grandma? Is this grandpa? I'm trying to reach grandma. And you say, you might say, yes, it is. Is this Matt? Because they might say, well, this is your grandson. I'm calling. Oh, Matt, is this Matt? And give that information away. And they say, yeah, I'm Matt. And I'm calling because my car broke down. And I can't get a hold of mom and dad. And I need money to pay the tow truck. And so this is a common scam that's actually still used today. It's been around for a while. And just take a second and pause and ask yourself if you're sure you're talking to who you think you are on the phone when they're asking for money or information like this. Definitely be skeptical of anyone who asks you to keep a secret over the phone. They're calling and they're telling you something or asking you for something, but don't tell anybody else. I want to keep this a secret. All of this, by the way, applies to text messages. So they might not necessarily call you and try to talk to you, but they could send you a text. Hey, I'm broken down and I need to pay the tow truck. Can you help me? Can you send money to this number so that I can pay the tow truck? Things like that. They'll come through texts and phone calls. You can also just try to keep track of the tricks that scammers are using today. And I've given a number of websites here where they keep a list of the different scams that people are trying to use. And maybe one of the best to visit is our Arizona Attorney General's website, where they keep track of scams that are targeting older adults or seniors. So these are all legitimate links. I know I tell you don't click on links, and then here I'm giving you some, but these will come up later. You could also just type them into your search engine, like I suggested you do, and not click the link. You can get to this information easily that way too. Okay, so we'll close by talking about what are some of those tricks that scammers are using today. I'll give you just a few examples. What their sort of trends, I guess, are in 2022. One is Zoom calls and other sorts of platforms. I know here we're using StreamYard. But anytime somebody reaches out to you through email or text or phone in other ways, and says you need to click on a link because your account might be suspended, someone's tried to hack into it, or you're missing an important message, anything that says, here's a message with the Zoom link, think carefully before you click on the link. Ask yourself if you recognize who the message is from. In this case, you might have gotten a link from TMC for Seniors, but look, is it coming from a TMC web email address? And only click if you feel confident that it's coming from who they say it is. So they know how you're using email today, which is to do more of this sort of video conferencing, and they're sending you emails from those sorts of platforms, Zoom, StreamYard, Google Meets, another one, and those sorts of things. Vaccine card selfies. So this one's a little old, but old in that it's about a year old. But many people post selfies of their vaccine card after they got their shots or their booster. You want to be careful about how you do this because it could give away personal information and location information that scammers will strip off the internet, off Facebook and other social media, and then try to get after you. So if you did post these things, just maybe take them down off your Facebook page and that sort of thing, and try not to do it going forward. Tell your friends not to do it. Online shopping is a huge one, in part because we do so much shopping online now, especially in the pandemic. They're getting better at mimicking real websites. Like I said, just don't click on links saying they're going to a website. Go to that website directly. And unfortunately, they're going after online dating too. So they can pretend to be somebody else in an online dating website and try to get personal information out of you, which is not, in some respects, sharing your name and sort of generally where you live. That's not unusual to share with someone you're interested in dating. But they're going after that information because they know that you will share it. So just be careful about who you're meeting online and what they're asking for, and ask yourself if it's a fair ask. And then it's not new for them to target Medicare and Medicaid, but they're doing so in new ways. So the scams today revolve around coronavirus and pandemic relief and this sort of thing. So Medicare wants me to remind you that they will never contact you without permission, and they will never call to sell you anything. Medicare doesn't do that. If somebody calls and says they're from Medicare and they're trying to sell you something, they're not from Medicare. FBI phone scams. This one's really popular right now. You get a call from the FBI or some other authority, and they say you're a suspect in a crime. But it might just be a mistaken identity. We just need some information from you to clear your name. The FBI won't do this. So these unfortunately work because in that moment you could feel like an immediate need to save your reputation and just, yeah, it's not me. Here's my Social Security. And after the fact, you might realize, well, why did I do that? But in the moment, it can feel quite different. And then probably one of the more common ones is an unlock scam. So this can come through text or email, where someplace that you go and you saved a password has been compromised according to the message. And they locked the account because they wanted to protect you. This was the bank protecting you from fraud. And you need to now enter your password by going to this link so that you can unlock your bank account. That's in fact the fraudster trying to get you to go to a fake bank website and give them your password so they can then go into your account and steal your money. Okay, so sorry to rush a little bit towards the end to get through that information that I wanted to share, but it brings us to the end, and I will definitely stick around as long as you need for questions. But I hope that you feel like you've achieved these goals for today. And with that, I'll take questions, and thanks for your time.
Thanks so much, Matt. I actually was thinking, I have received a multitude of phone scams lately, and it seems like it's increased, particularly during the pandemic. I don't know how many car warranties I can I can accept. They're always calling about a car warranty on a car I don't even own, so it's always very interesting to see. And I did have a comment from one of our attendees who was watching about Amazon. And a lot of us are shopping online, through Amazon right now. And she's been receiving calls from somebody saying they're from Amazon and they're putting her account on hold. And of course, she said she did hang up and she logged into Amazon and there's no message from Amazon. So, definitely doing the right thing there is important. Can you talk a little bit about how you could tell maybe if a website is secure? Let's say if you're going to be putting in your credit card, and we do have a lot of people who are doing that online shopping now, maybe some advice that they can follow for that?
Well, yes, that's a great question. So I think it's one thing you can do is never save your credit card information. So I think websites and search engines like Google think they're being helpful when they say, well, why don't you just save this credit card information for future purchases? You come here all the time. And you could decline. You don't have to let them save your credit card information. And that's the safest thing that you can do to make sure that despite what they might tell you that it's secure, it's not always secure. And it limits the likelihood that it'll be stolen in the future. So when you hear about in the news these reports of some hacker group stole millions of credit card numbers, it's oftentimes because people said, yeah, I'll go ahead and save my account. I come to Amazon all the time. I know that can be a hassle because if you're like, my household, buying something on Amazon is close to a daily occurrence these days. But taking the time to enter the account information protects you. Another is if you're I think this becomes more of an issue with small business, with websites, because you want to. I want you to support small business, but oftentimes you feel like they don't have the reputation that you would like to see to give them that information online. Well, what you could do is you could call them instead. And many of these small businesses, you can find the phone number. You can talk to them on the phone and ask them if you can make a purchase that way. Another is to use credit cards that have fraud protection, so that you can keep track and quickly put a stop to some fraudulent use of your credit card and get your money back, so they're insured. Those are, I guess, probably my 3 pieces of advice there.
Okay, great. And then also maybe the lock, if they can find the closed lock on the website as well.
That's right. So some Google does this, and I think Mozilla does it as well. Another less commonly used, but another search engine where you can see in the corner a little lock symbol, and if it's locked, it's got more security protections in place. So that's a great point.
Okay, great. And then I love that you shared those resources, and we will share this presentation afterwards. Somebody was asking, where can they go to look up that data on what scams are out there. So it looks like you covered that, and we'll be able to share that out afterwards as well for everyone. So, Matt, I just want to thank you so much for being here today and being able to share all of this important information. It is highly critical now more than ever. I think that everybody is just aware of what is out there and how they can safely protect themselves when they're online or using their phone, on a daily basis. We do have a presentation tomorrow as well. And it is Innovations in Healthy Aging, and that is with Kathleen Insel, who is an RN with U of A College of Nursing. She will be discussing all of our the grants that are going on through the university on healthy aging. So we're really excited for that. She will be here at 10 a.m. as well. So we hope you'll join us again. And thank you so much for being here, Matt. We look forward to having you again.
Yeah, thanks for your time.